All right, welcome everyone to the Re-Envision West Arden Arcade Design Workshop opening presentation. Thank you all for being here. Really excited to get started here. We'll let others trickle in, and before I kick it off and share with you our agenda, I'd like to pass it over to Christy to say a few opening and welcoming words.
Sure, thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Christy Grabo, Associate Planner with Sacramento County and the Project Manager for this exciting project. I'm so glad to see familiar and new faces here tonight, and I would like to thank each and every one of you for taking the time to be with us. We really appreciate all the participation and public involvement that we've had so far with this project and look forward to building on that. On behalf of Sac County and our consultant team of Tool Design and Opticos, we are so pleased to kick off this design workshop. We really look forward to the conversations and ideas that will come out of this meeting and also Thursday's meeting. And once again, thank you for attending.
Great, thanks, Christy. All right, let's get going. I want to give you a quick overview of what we're going to talk about this evening. We'll give you a quick project overview and update for those who are new to the project and those who are wondering what we've been doing between now and the last discovery workshop. And then we really want to hear from you. There's two activities we're going to walk through. The first of which is going to be transportation oriented. The second of which is going to be focused on the built environment. And then we'll convene together and spend the last 15 minutes answering any additional questions you might have about the project, process, or anything we discussed tonight. So that's the general overview. We'll go through a little virtual housekeeping here, just as a reminder that there are a couple of different features within Zoom I want to call your attention to. Please look at the participants. You can see who's attending. Change your name if you have the opportunity to do so. This is where you can find your chat function. So this is sending a message to people on the meeting. So you can send a message to everyone or just the host. And you can also raise your hand. Again, everyone's muted upon entry. And please use the chat feature or raise your hand if you have a question. Again, we'll hold all questions for the overall group till the end, but we will definitely be monitoring them. So please go ahead and add your questions as you need to. If you are tuning in by phone, we'll ask you to press 9 to raise your hand and 6 to unmute when prompt. Again, 9 to raise your hand, 6 to unmute when prompt. And if you haven't done so already, please rename yourself so we know who's in attendance at the meeting. We'll appreciate that. So you'll find if you see your visual of yourself, you can see there's 3 dots. Please click on that and you can change your name there. If you're listening just by phone, please link your phone number to your computer. Oh, excuse me, if you're tuning in by computer and then listening by phone, you can coordinate the two. So this is how to do that. There should be a participant ID in the middle of your screen to do that. And just a reminder, this call is being recorded. We have been posting all of our public meetings on the West Arden Arcade, Re-Envision West Arden Arcade project website. And you'll be able to view it or send it to a friend if you want to see it after this. So welcome again. We're excited to talk with you tonight. Again, this is the beginning of our what we call a design workshop. And before I jump into what we've been doing so far, I just want to remind you what the project is really about. So this was a project initiated by Sacramento County Office of Planning and Environmental Review. Christy Grabo is our project manager, and she's supported by John Lundgren, who are part of the conversation this evening as well. And who's speaking right now is Cindy Zerger from Tool Design Group. I'm the project manager and urban designer with our California office, and leading the initiative. Our team of Tool Design Group is focused on livable transportation projects like this. And we come in and work with communities like this one, like yours, to really re-envision what streets can be for everyone, including motorists, bicyclists, people who walk, everyone who enjoys your spaces on your streets. And we've partnered with Opticos Design. Is a fantastic firm out of Berkeley here in California, and they are focused on architecture and urban design work. And we've partnered with them on a number of projects, and it's been a really great collaboration between our two disciplines when we talk about complete streets and making communities more walkable, livable, and more vibrant. The project in general was initiated by, again, the Office of Planning and Environmental Review. They received a Caltrans Sustainable Communities grant, which allowed them to take on a 16-month planning process. And the goal is really to develop an actionable plan that provides comfortable and connected facilities. And when I say facilities, that means provisions or things for people to walk, people to bike, people to take transit, and people to drive in the area. So for all users, that's really our focus. Balances those multimodal needs through different types of innovative design. Promotes a culture of safety for all modes. So really, again, safety and comfort from a people-first perspective, and increasing the economic opportunities for local businesses and redevelopment within the area. And address sustainability and equity through providing transportation options. Our project study area is a part of West Arden Arcade, and this is a map just to give you a general sense of what we're talking about. The northern boundary here is Cottage Way, Cottage Avenue, and the southern boundary is Northrop Avenue. To the east is Watt, with a little extension for the shopping center and the middle school here along Arden Way, and to the west it's Howe. And so that's generally our project area. Of course, as they applied for a grant, you have to put lines down on a map to receive the funding. But a lot of the things that we're talking about tonight absolutely can fit with the greater context as well. An overview of our project schedule. We initiated this project in the spring of this year, and throughout the summer, we've been holding a variety of engagement opportunities, the first of which was a discovery workshop in August. And we've had ongoing community engagement conversations, which I'll mention in just a little bit. You can see we're now at the design workshop, August 5th through 8th, and there'll be an opportunity today to speak, and then also on Thursday. And in the winter and spring of this year, this coming year as well, we'll be working on our draft plan and adoption of the final plan looking at spring of 2021. So quickly, again, we are here. You've joined us for our opening presentation and discussion. We'll be continuing to work as a design team throughout the week. So we started early this morning, and we'll continue to work Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday on advancing some of our ideas. And we'll reveal those ideas at a closing presentation on Thursday, and that should actually say 5 to 6:30 p.m. I encourage you to attend our project website. Or go to our project website right here. The URL is at the bottom here. If you haven't been there already, loads of information, PDFs from the last design workshop, some FAQs or some answers to the frequently asked questions, and links to all of our public presentations are there as well. Wanted to mention again that this is really a visioning process. This is a planning effort by the Planning and Environmental Review Department. And there are a lot of things that are happening in your community, and it nests within all of those. The idea is that this project is complementary to a number of the efforts that you see here, and also can be informed by them as well. So the environmental justice element, different types of community-wide action plans, lots of different things happening by the Planning and Environmental Review Office, but also from the Department of Transportation and other departments taking lead on some initiatives. And again, we're really trying to understand and really create a plan that satisfies a lot of the goals of some of these other efforts as well. So we have had a wonderful opportunity to meet with a variety of folks within the community. I'd say this is just a list of the 23 organizations that we've met with through stakeholder conversations at the last discovery workshop, and then also through our community advisory committee, which we're meeting with 6 times over the life of the project, 2 of which have already happened, the next of which is tomorrow. And we've also had a number of people from the community and adjacent to it come into our public meetings. So thanks for being a part of this effort. We've also been using an online survey, which was opened on July 30th. I'll talk a little bit more about those results in just a minute. We closed that on September 11th. And we're excited. We have another opportunity to engage with actually youth in the community. And we've created a student engagement activity that will be launching in the next couple of weeks for students to hopefully participate in and provide their feedback and their experiences within the community. What we heard, at the Discovery Workshop, which happened again in August, is some major key themes, I would say. And I wanted to mention a few of those so you know that this is what we've heard and then how that's really translating to what we call design directives. So I'll talk a little bit about what we heard at the Discovery Workshop, talk a little bit about what we heard online, and you'll see some emerging themes that the community and the people who have been participating value the diversity, the family-friendly nature and health of the healthy community that you have, and that they want to leverage that. They want to create a vibrant neighborhood with a strong sense of identity. There's a lot of opportunities to improve that here, and improving accessibility for people who walk, bike, and take transit within the community. Feels very convenient to motor through this area, to take a vehicle through it, but what is it that's going to create that accessibility for other folks as well, who don't necessarily drive everywhere or want to be able to walk to their destinations? And the idea of seeing local businesses thrive and creating attractive destinations that are really people-scaled and people-friendly. Complementary to our virtual engagement during the design discovery workshop, we initiated this online survey, and it was open from July 30th through September 11th. We had 77 people complete from start to finish, but we had over 200 people who initiated the survey, which means they completed it to some fashion, but didn't finish every question, which is a great number, I would say. And we heard some things that we heard during the initial workshop. There's some ways we asked people to use words to describe West Arden Arcade today. And while we may see ugly or dirty or decline as probably negative words, that's also tells us there's a lot of opportunity for improvement. And we heard a lot about what people want to see in terms of a vision. So creating a walkable, clean, and thriving area. We asked about walking and biking in West Arden Arcade. People mentioned it's difficult because there are poor bikeways or a lack of bikeways, continuity or consistency, no sidewalks or lack thereof, car traffic and the fast speeds. So these are, again, a variety of things that we heard when we asked the question specifically around walking and biking. We heard folks want to walk and bike to shopping or dining destinations, to parks or recreation, and home and school are some of the destinations that we heard about. In terms of what would make them, what do people want on their streetscapes? We heard a lot about street trees and other landscaping. I think we heard in the discovery workshop the importance of shade and making it more comfortable for people to walk. Safety and walking for people walking or biking kind of rose to the top, as well as public art, which may be about that identity idea, as well as spaces to hold community events and gather. We asked a question about land use and the housing types people wanted to have and the new and desired land uses here. People were talking about community amenities, so that may be some social services or institutions like additional libraries or things like that. We heard about housing and the interest in what we call the missing middle, or what Opticos would call the missing middle, the types of housing that's in between that single family detached dwelling to multifamily apartments. So some interesting ideas for us as we think about redevelopment in the area. So based on all that input, we like to talk about design directives for our team. And we heard loud and clear the importance of creating comfortable, safe places to walk and bike, creating spaces for trees and shade and landscaping throughout the community, creating a sense of identity and nodes of activity with cohesive connections. So you'll see when we jump into some of the work, this has really influenced our initiatives or our thoughts on certain different types of corridor improvements and land use improvements. So the first thing we did was really develop what we call a place-based network of streets to improve access. And access, I mean, not just motor vehicle access, but access for pedestrians, for cyclists, and for people who are taking transit. So we broke this down into different types of corridors, prosperity corridors, neighborhood greenways, and parkways. So you can see here what we're thinking about in terms of which would be best prosperity corridors. That's Arden Way, Watt, and Howe, and then breaking it down into a finer grain with the neighborhood greenways and the parkways as well. We can talk more about this in our small group activity as you jump into that. We also looked at community destinations. So identifying what's there, what's existing, and some of the main destinations within the community and just adjacent. So a number of your schools, the different parks, important service places like Kaiser Permanente and recreational amenities. And then the idea is to really overlay and create additional nodes and corridors, how we stitch those together. We looked at the potential of creating community nodes, mixed use sort of town center nodes, and then also neighborhood nodes. So Matali will talk a little bit more about that when we jump into the land use discussion. So just a sense of where we're at in the project. And what we'll like to do right now, it's about 5:20, so I think I'm on time or ahead of time, which is great, is have two really great conversations around two topics. The first one will be focused on transportation, and then the second one will be focused on the built form. And I just want to do a little bit of quick overview of how this is going to work. We will, Ian Lockwood, who's the principal charge on this project, is going to talk about just basic intro to the transportation discussion and what we want to hear from you tonight. So I'll pass it off to him in just a minute. We'll break into small groups after that presentation by Ian. And then we will have a small group facilitated activity. And then we'll come back together as a large group and have an opportunity to report out together so we can hear what each of the small group sessions we're talking about. And then we'll have Matali from Opticos Design talk about some of the built form aspects, and then we'll do the exact same thing in that small group. So I'm going to pass it off to Ian. I'll control the PowerPoint, Ian, but feel free to unmute yourself and go ahead.
Thank you, Cindy. Hello, everybody. Thank you for attending. I wish I could meet you in person, but there's a pandemic going on, so here we are virtually meeting. I just want to remind folks about our last get-together, where we talked about how to create a great neighborhood, great streets. And I just want to emphasize on the top left, community values. And that's the kind of thing that Cindy was talking about, how we want to reflect those in our approach. Next slide. So one of the things we'd like to do is increase the mobility for everybody in the neighborhood. And what we mean by mobility is a lot of different groups, all the different populations, elderly folks, young folks, people with disabilities, cyclists, pedestrians. Everybody has different mobility needs, and we need to think about them all, not just the motorist. Next slide. There's a thought that arterial streets are only for motorists going long distances and quickly. That's not true. There's a lot of destinations on your arterials that people use, and they need to be accessible on foot, by bike, by transit, and also by car. Next slide. So if you look at an aerial photograph of Western Arcade, you can see the dark areas and the light areas. And the light areas are where the arterials are. And so you can tell just by the rooftops that that's where you're going to find restaurants and grocery stores and jobs and entertainment. And so there's a lot of things on arterials that people need and want to access. So arterial streets have a tremendous access role, and you don't see grocery stores on local streets, for example, because you need to have access from an arterial street. And this is not just a contemporary thing. This goes back to arterials a long time ago, as you can see by the slide on the bottom right. So this has been an age-old thing that arterials have a huge access role. Next slide. So on the right, you can see that arterials have a much larger access role than local streets, but they also have a throughput role. So we have to design the street to allow a throughput, but not at the expense of the businesses and the neighborhood, and getting to your schools and all these sorts of things that you want to access off the arterial roads. Next slide. So here's an example of a street that had been misdesigned to just foster throughput, and it's completely at an automobile scale and truck scale. You can see the size of those signs. And on the bottom right is what we've done to it, and now it's a completely accessible street for people on foot, on bike, by car, and it's doing very well. The economy along that street is doing much better. The businesses are doing better. You can see some of the investment going on an empty lot on the left-hand side. Next slide. So what we're going to do is we're going to be looking at a whole bunch of sections, and there's a lot of detail there, but what we'd like you to do is kind of focus on the things that align with your values. And three of the top ones were the trees. Next slide. And you can see for all three before and afters for Bell Street and Hurley Way and Arden Arcade Expressway, that they all have trees in the after photographs. Next slide. They all have comfortable sidewalks. And lastly, they all have separated bike facilities. So what we're trying to do is show you examples of how we could change the arterials in your network to better serve you and reflect your values. So that's what we want to look at when we move into the examples. And then there's lots of things that we're calling spot treatments. These are things like crossings, intersection designs, bulb out so you can see both ways before you cross the street safely, mini circles, and all these sorts of little things that you can populate your intersections and neighborhoods with to make life easier and more comfortable. Next slide. So this is what we call the sustainability litmus test, and this is something we suggest everyone keep in mind when asking different questions or thinking about your streets. Does the change reward the short trip or the transit trip? Short trips involve walking, cycling, people in wheelchairs, people who have visual disabilities. Short trips involve going to your homes, going to school, going to the businesses throughout your community, going to the recreational areas, going to your parks, not just by car, but by bus and all these different modes. And what we're trying to do is change the arterials to really support those vulnerable modes. And there's a few questions we can ask ourselves. About travel speeds. On the arterial streets, do high travel speeds benefit the community? Do they benefit the businesses? And of course, the answer is no. Slower speeds benefit folks in terms of safety and access to businesses, reading signs, turning into parking lots, and that kind of thing. Do crossing locations matter? Do you want many crossing locations so you can cross the street to get to your neighbor's place or to a business, to a restaurant, something like that? So we want plenty of crossing locations so your streets are permeable. Shade came up so many times when people are walking and cycling. Does shade reward short trips or transit trips? Oh, sure they do. When you're waiting for the bus and in the sun, it's just not comfortable. And then sidewalks and separated bike facilities. These are the most vulnerable users of the street, and we want them to be designed to be comfortable. So designing those nicely rewards the short trips and the transit trips. So ask yourself those questions through that little test, and you generally get the right answer for design. Next slide, please. So we're going to be looking at 4 different sections when we get into our little group, and what we're going to be asking folks is about your feedback on the sections, things you like, what you want to see more of, and things you don't like or you're concerned about. And then after that, we'll go into the spot treatments. And so what's going to happen is Malia is going to divide us into groups, and there'll be somebody there from tool design and somebody from Opticos, and we'll facilitate the group for about half an hour, and then we'll get back together as a whole group, and we'll share what we've all come up with so we can compare and contrast. So I'm
going to go round robin. We'll take about 5 minutes here to discuss what you heard in your session. So I'll open it up. Maybe Sarah and Stefan, if your group would want to go first and give us a sense of the discussion in your group.
Thanks, Cindy. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. We had a great discussion in our group. A lot about some comments about wanting to provide not only street trees to get that shade along the corridor, but also thinking about how we're going to accommodate street furniture and places for people to stop and sit, which we might touch on a little in our second half of the discussion. We also talked about ways that we can make crossing our study streets that we're focusing on, ways that we can make the crossing of those more comfortable at those local neighborhood streets. So like that first example intersection that a lot of us looked at that connects the neighborhood to the park. It's a really difficult intersection to cross today because cars are just speeding right along that corridor, and there are so many people trying to cross that street from the park to the neighborhood. So thinking about how we can make that crossing more comfortable, maybe providing a crossing on both sides of the street instead of just one, so people don't have to cross the street twice. And also thinking about places where we can provide some pedestrian scale lighting to make it more comfortable for peds, and just additional elements that we can add to make crossing more comfortable in those areas.
Great, thank you, Sarah. We'll go ahead to Bonnie and Matali.
Hi, everyone. So our team, when taking a look at the cross sections, we got a lot of positive feedback. Folks were pretty excited about what they were seeing. Definitely, we saw a preference for the linear park on Alta Arden Expressway. Folks were really excited about that, and also noted that there is a lack of park space for residents in the area. And then for Arden Way, we did get note that the street, in addition to the design, will need some traffic calming elements as well, because speeds are so high along that roadway. And then we get a few notes, specific spaces in the neighborhood streets. One is on Fulton near Target. Someone in our group had mentioned that they know a person with a wheelchair who finds it very difficult to access Target along the roadway because of the conditions that are there now. And then Hurley between Watt and Fulton has a lot of kids and parents walking along the street, and in its current state it feels and is very dangerous for them. So it's a quick overview of what we talked about.
Great, thanks, Bonnie. We'll move on to Ian and Caroline.
So I'll start. Maybe Caroline can fill in, but we didn't get through everything. But folks are generally supportive of the direction because it'll reduce the kind of the hostility and noise of traffic in general. People like straight, sensible sidewalks and bike facilities. They like benches so people can rest, particularly elderly folks. They like the shade. They like to be able to see and not have hiding places. There's a lot of concern about this raising the value of the neighborhood such that displacement would occur. So there's a land use concern about gentrification and displacement, and zoning, but that's where we got brought back into the big group. People are supportive of the bike lanes being separate from the motorists and not on the street. And that there's a lot of people.
I'm glad for those report outs, and we have a lot of notes, of course, to sift through and continue to inform our design, the evolution of our design. So I'm going to pass it off to Matali to intro us to the next section, which is going to be about the built form.
All right. Hi, everyone. Glad to be here. And, as we just heard, even from the reporting out of the previous small group breakout, people are kind of concerned about what some of these changes might mean in terms of gentrification and stuff. So I think that's a good way for us to also take a step back and think about like, what's the underlying reason? Why are we doing this? We're kind of trying to improve the streets. We're trying to make them more walkable, but that's basically the word, to focus in on. We're trying to improve the walkability of this place. And what does that ultimately mean? It means just how friendly a place is to walking and biking, where it's optional to use a car and it's actually safe. And even more importantly, it's enjoyable for people to be able to walk just for common errands and destinations. As you can see from the images, walkability has connotations, it's also quite a buzzword. So, it's important to remember that it's not just for, kind of very chic, upscale places, and it's not just associated with kind of, roadside cafes and outside dining. It's about the basic fundamentals of how everyday errands and everyday life happens for most people living there. The next slide, please, Cindy. So this needs to be a walkable place that is safe for everyone. And we're talking about the most basic, needs on a day-by-day basis. Should be safe for children. It needs to be safe for people of all abilities. It needs to be safe for people to just walk around and comfortably and safely carry out daily errands. Next slide. And there's, underlying that and related to that is this concept of a 15-minute neighborhood. This is like a schematic graphic which shows what all different components need to be part of a neighborhood so that people actually feel motivated to do a lot of walking and biking in their day-to-day lives. And, as you can see some of these images, they need to be neighborhood schools, some kind of neighborhood grocery stores, playgrounds, and in general, just comfortable, inviting streets. Next slide. And when we take a look at West Arden Arcade, this is a map that we produced at the Discovery Week, like in August. And in this, we just mapped all, the community amenities, as we call them. Now, that's a fancy word, but basically it means all the places where people like to go. And these include, not just the local parks, but also the schools, also like popular destinations and, employment hubs such as Kaiser. It also means a local Target. It also means a local grocery store. So these were the places that emerged, everything that's colored on the map. And there were also some destinations which are just outside the project area. So as you can see, all the components that we talk about in terms of making this a 15-minute neighborhood, a genuinely walkable place, are already there. All that we need to improve are kind of the connections and just making it more enjoyable for people to walk and bike. And, in a way, this can be the perfect neighborhood, which many other places really lack, especially kind of single-family neighborhoods. So now one kind of question is that, it's all about ultimately slowing down traffic, making it easier to walk and bike. So why is built form important? And the reason for that is that it's not just enough to design the street right away. It's also very important to design what happens in that interface between where the asphalt ends and where the private property begins. And also, what does a built form, or at least the facade and the frontage of the building look like alongside that public realm? So as you can see over here, it's all color-coded, the different elements that must all work in harmony to make a place truly walkable. Next slide, Cindy. So here you see, again, the role of the built form. There are subtle differences, such as how close are buildings placed to the sidewalk? What is the height and the, just the form of the buildings? Where are the entrances located? What does the ground floor look like? All these different aspects help to either make the sidewalk active and well used or not. So, the way people perceive an area is not just about whether the traffic is moving more slowly. It's about how they feel, how comfortable they feel, how safe they feel, and whether it's an enjoyable experience to be actually walking next to the buildings that, we need to be thinking about. So in the first design workshop that was in August, we looked at, and Cindy also discussed this earlier, we looked at the concept of different types of nodes and in between corridors. And we found that there were two main categories, and these are kind of the same sort of places. They're mixed use nodes, but the intensity of users and potentially the kind of form, the built form that will emerge from there, also the intensity of traffic, they would vary depending on the kind of node that there is. So we came up with this map, and this graphic shows the two types of nodes that we found could develop within the project area. And these are at the town center level, which are more kind of community serving. And then at a more local level are the neighborhood center nodes, which you see in the lighter color. So as part of the charrette over the next 2 to 3 days, we would be actually taking a deeper dive, really kind of getting deeper into design for 2 of these nodes. Our example for the town center node would be that stretch of Arden Way between Watt and Morse, as you can see in the blue rectangle. And then we're also looking at the Fulton and Hurley node. The next slide, Cindy. So this all is kind of nice to think about as a long-term strategy, and especially some of the changes would take a long time because we're talking about privately held parcels and private development, and no one is recommending any kind of demolition in the near future. These parcels will develop over time. So what can we do in the near term and what can we do in the long term? In the near term, we can think about a whole variety of low cost and quick build improvements. As you can see in this example, it's an underutilized parking lot, and it just takes some very simple but well thought out measures such as food trucks, maybe some good lighting, maybe some activities, maybe some music, maybe even a temporary play structure for kids. And there you have it. You have a vibrant public space in a space where you need it. Similarly, we need to kind of really rethink our relationship to parking. Parking is very important. It's required for businesses, but at the point that it starts dominating and taking over what is public space, I think there's a problem. So let's just kind of think about what's possible, whether it's temporary or whether it's permanent, by utilizing the parking space that already exists. So here you see some examples of parklets, And again, they can be quick transformations, temporary transformations just to test out ideas, or they can even be, the next slide, please, Cindy. Or we can even apply the same logic to thinking about parking lots. You know, there are a number of parking lots within the project area. And as this example from Milwaukee shows, if it's not getting fully utilized, if there's a lot of vacant space available, why not take a corner and try and do something different with it? It's not going to be expensive. It's just something temporary. If it works, you know, the paint will eventually wash off. But this is a great way of trying to test out ideas and try and build a sense of community. The next slide. And parking lots, it's not kind of a breakthrough idea, you know, at this point of time. People have been experimenting all over the country and with quite a lot of success. As you can see from these examples, you can have weekly markets, you can just have maybe a weekly food truck fair, you can even have temporary, you know, kind of games and activities, all of them low cost, all of them quick and easy, but they all help in creating a sense of identity for places. Next. So that being said, for the short term, let's kind of, you know, think about a long-term vision. So again, what I'm trying to show through these images is that we're not just talking about transforming streets, we're also trying to think about what kind of built form on the sides would be supporting the changes that we're recommending. And this would also be what we'd really like your thoughts on in the small group discussion. So here you can see that we're transforming kind of, you know, an outer scale street into more of a community level or a town center level node in which you do have like just a more intense set of activities. You know, the uses on the ground floor are more commercial. You also have like wider streets, you have more people collecting, and there are kind of more community level destinations. The next slide. At the same time, it's not enough to just do those, because we are also thinking at the neighborhood level. So we can also think about smaller scale, kind of, you know, slightly more modest transformations and slightly, you know, smaller building changes. But all of these contribute to making neighborhood nodes really vibrant and supporting the community that lives there. So these would be the questions that we'll kind of take up. There's a lot of text, so let's not kind of get lost in the details. But the big questions are, what aspects of built form do you think are most important? You know, like the facades and the frontages and the form that we discussed. And what do you think would work best in this project area in the short term and in the long term? So that's what we'll be discussing in the small groups.
Great, thanks, Mitali. So I'm going to go ahead and open all the rooms again. We're going to go back into the same groups to discuss, and Opticos staff will facilitate this next discussion. So discussion in your small group activity, and would love to turn it over to, let's go with Caroline's group first and hear about that discussion and how it went.
Sure. We had some enthusiasm for mixed use buildings, and people were envisioning housing above retail and thinking about how that would help enliven the street. We also talked about different public spaces. People liked the idea of using parking lots for creative things like food trucks. And then also had a suggestion for a type of civic space that could really enhance the neighborhood, and that's a community garden. One of our group members pointed out that because of the immigrant communities that live here, it could be a great opportunity for people to, for example, grow the kinds of vegetables that they don't find in their neighborhood grocery store. Could see that being a fitting addition to the neighborhood. Those are some of the highlights.
Great, thanks, Caroline. Let's move on to Eric's group. Eric, can you report back on your conversation?
Sure, Cindy, thanks. Our conversation took a really great turn. We addressed a lot of points that we, or at least I haven't considered fully, in particular, some more focus on the number of empty buildings in the project boundary and the surrounding area, as well as creating more program that's dedicated to serve the community in terms of a broader demographic and better access, and it could serve as like a community space and a resource and a destination.
Great, thanks, Eric. And how about, whoops, excuse me, apologies. Let's go to Mitali's group.
Hi, Cindy, thanks. We had a really spirited discussion, and also a very valid point was raised about how all of these proposed changes can lead to gentrification, and what should be done in the plan to address that, from the get-go. So that's an important topic, and I think we had a sidebar conversation on that as well. Apart from that, in our group, we got a lot of enthusiasm again about mixed use, about having housing above like ground floor commercial or retail, other kinds of retail uses. And the fact that additional floors and more height in the area can really help shade streets and create a better environment. We also heard about different kinds of activities, both in the public realm and also in terms of the short-term use of parking lots and other vacant spaces. And with a lot of focus towards activities involving families and youth, especially. So, and there was a lot of sense of the fact that these spaces can be used for just highlighting the fact that this entire neighborhood is very multicultural, and there are people from different parts of the world. So, this can really be an interesting way to have different types of festivals and different types of events to kind of showcase that aspect of the community. There was also some discussion about about what the future build form should be like, and the fact that, yes, mixed use is a big yes, and also the fact that multiple stories, we don't exactly know how many, but definitely more than one story would help. And, in terms of the public realm, more landscaping, more better, like less asphalt basically, and more greenery and more street furniture, and just kind of making it more comfortable for people. So we got some great feedback on that.
Great, thanks, Mitali. I'll open it up to any of the other facilitators. Anything that wasn't mentioned that you'd like to just mention for either conversation around transportation or land use before we jump into a Q&A?
I'd like to just say a couple things. Somebody brought up the idea of addressing flooding simultaneously with the reworking of the land through natural on-site changes rather than concrete structures. And then there was some folks who had trouble envisioning how you could build to the street, and so some kind of idea of how that could be staged from the temporary to the permanent.
Yeah, great comments. Important things to think about as we think of phasing as well, and green infrastructure opportunities. So thank you for that. Sounds like it was really great conversation. I had an opportunity to go into the different rooms and hear from folks. We wanted to take this opportunity at the end of the conversation or the end of the session to really have a Q&A and open it up for a large group discussion. So any questions you might have about the overall project, and then anything that you wanted to say that you didn't get to in a small group forum that you want to mention to the large group. So I'll just quickly, I'm going to go to a next slide, and then I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that we can see everyone and see faces and have a good conversation. So just a reminder that you're muted right now. If you want to, raise your hand and we'll unmute you. Malia will be doing that as we need to. And then if you're on the phone, how you do that is you press 9 to raise your hand and 6 to unmute when you're prompted. So again, I'll say thank you at this point in time, and we'll turn it, well, I'm going to stop sharing, and we will convene in a small group, in this large group, and have a question and answer. So I'll open it up. Anyone have any questions?
We have Ann Cole has her hand raised, so I'm going to unmute you right now, Ann, and you can ask your question. And also, folks, feel free to enter questions in the chat. So Ann, you should have gotten a prompt to unmute. Let me know if that's not the case in the chat.
Okay, am I okay?
Yes.
I wanted to find, since I missed 2 meetings that were held in August, I wanted to find out if there were, and I understand you're recording these, is there some way I could get the meetings and look at what you discussed in August at those meetings?
Yes, absolutely, Anne. Thanks for the question. I'm going to share my screen again and mention there's a project website, and that's on the bottom of this slide. You can see if you go to www.bit.ly and then / and then spell out West Arden Arcade, capitals, you don't need them. Go to that location and you'll see there are links to the presentations. So the recordings are live and they'll take you to a YouTube channel and you can watch the video recording. You can also download a PDF of the PowerPoint presentations that were shared during that time.
That would be nice, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Any other questions that folks want to mention? Again, like Malia said, feel free to chat. And then it looks like, Malia, you might have someone who has a hand raised.
We have the phone number. It's 916-485, and I won't read the rest of it, but if that's you, I'm unmuting you now.
Oh, okay.
I don't, if that, there we go. Yeah.
Okay, it's Gene again. I was wondering, I didn't hear, but getting back to the landscape and the mature trees along some of the green belt particularly, were you considering suggesting putting the utilities underground so that there's a greater opportunity to have trees of some height that can throw some real shade rather than being limited in where they're located and the height because of the power or telephone lines? I was wondering if that had...
Yeah, that's a great question, Jean. So I think in particular, you're talking about the idea of the Arden Parkway, which we're kind of thinking of as a linear park potentially. And if that were the case, if that takes hold as a vision, certainly would need to be a full reconstruct of that street. And I think the opportunity at that time, when you think about a full reconstruct like that and making it a park, that's the time to think about utility undergrounding, and would be a perfect opportunity so that you can encourage the tree canopy that you really want. There could be really wonderful opportunities to create a really wonderful landscape through that area. Shade trees, ornamental trees, definitely hear you on making sure that they don't run into the power lines. So definitely would be our recommendation.
And just the last thing, I really support the lady who brought up about the drainage issue and pointed out various problems. Northrop in 1986, during the flooding, a good portion of Northrop was underwater, and actually there was on TV people with small little sailboats sailing up and down it. So that there is real concern about the drainage there. I have to agree with her. Thank you.
Thanks, Jean. Yeah, we've heard that a number of times, and the importance of dealing with the flooding. And as some folks have mentioned, those are opportunities to really handle green infrastructure opportunities to handle the stormwater on site rather than send it downstream. Because as you send it downstream, that really impacts different areas. As you probably see, some of your, I think you have some sluways as well. Those probably flood. So thinking about strategies where we can really encourage groundwater handling in location will be something that we'll think about as well, and identify some of those opportunities, whether they're in the streetscape or in kind of different interventions on some of the landscape as well.
So next we had a question from Heather Gonzalez. So Heather, I'll prompt you to unmute right now.
Great, thank you so much. And I'll try to be brief. Something that we talked about in our group that I wanted to just kind of make sure I had clarity on next steps and where I can access the information was in relation to any kind of report or projection on the economic impact of the housing market in relation to those concerns that tie into, you know, gentrification of the neighborhood, so on and so forth. And I couldn't recall what the response was or who the person was that I needed to connect with to acquire that data. And then I know that there was a like a Sacramento County initiative or process that could kind of work on some policy aspects. And so I wanted to revisit that and get clarity and actually write it down so I can follow up.
Sure, thanks, Heather. So if I understand, you're looking for how this might, you know, the economic analysis work that might be associated with the type of work we're doing right now, which I can speak to, and then contact information for additional information, maybe on the housing element in particular. So the first, in terms of the first comment, that's, you know, doing an economic analysis of some of the suggestions we're doing specifically around the streetscape and built form aren't a part of this process. But one thing that will be considered in terms of our plan, our draft plan and our final plan, would be the importance of taking a look at the economic impacts of the types of interventions we're developing and whether they make sense or not for the neighborhood and for the community. In terms of the question on housing, Christy, I might turn it over to you to mention what you're working on with the housing element and anything you want to share there.
Yeah, sure. So we are working on the housing element update right now, and I'm part of the team for that. We will start doing our outreach effort at the end of October into November. We do have 2 workshop meetings, and I believe those are going to be in the beginning of November. Heather, I do have your email, so if I'll reach out to you tomorrow morning and connect with you there. But if you have any specific questions, definitely email me. That would be awesome.
Thank you. And I guess just kind of a secondary question, at what point in the process, because I was looking at the timeline for conclusion, and it looks like we're ending this process in December to, all of our considerations. At what point are we going to be referencing that economic impact in this process?
Yeah, so actually our project goes through next year. So we will be working on the draft plan this fall through the winter. There'll be a couple more opportunities to provide feedback and take a look at what we're working on. And then it'll be adopted. I think it needs to go to the County Board of Supervisors. Is that, do you have a date for that, Christy, or is that sort of next summer?
For this project, I don't have a date for the board yet.
Yeah. So it would be next spring/summer for adoption at that point. And I think maybe to clarify what I mentioned is that as part of the draft plan, there will be a mention sort of in the narrative that will say, all of these ideas are really important to consider for the community, and as well as how they will benefit the community or their impacts economically to the area. So it wouldn't be that we're going to be doing that as part of this process. That is not within our scope of work. And frankly, we're not at the point with some of the concepts, right? We'll be just coming up with basic streetscape ideas and then some adjacent land use change, but that's, you wouldn't do a full economic analysis unless you had a real idea of what sort of development we're going to go in certain areas.
I don't see any additional questions in the chat or anyone with their hand raised. So I guess this is a last call. If you have a question, please raise your hand or enter it in the chat.
I'll pause for a little bit longer.
Oh, I see one.
Okay, great.
So John Cranley, I'm going to unmute you now. You should get a prompt that you will be unmuted.
There we go. It sounds like, Cindy, based upon what you just said, this is going to be more of a skeleton plan that you're coming up with that could be burnished, could be fleshed out at some future date. Did I catch that right?
Yeah, that's the way we would talk about it. Is that it's a project that was funded through the Sustainable Communities Grant project, and the idea is to come up with an overall vision. And what that does for a community like West Arden Arcade is it unlocks the possibility to go after future funding to be able to implement, right? But this is one of the first steps, so that components of this project, say you have some great ideas for Hurley Way, that can advance through a different funding mechanism to go into the next phase of really planning at that point, and then conceptual design. So that would be kind of the next step for something like that. Same thing on the land use or redevelopment side. John or Christy, anything you want to add to that?
This is John Lundgren with County Planning. Yes, I'll add that you nailed the point there. This opens the door of funding. In our breakout group, Talitha and Nora had some really good questions for us that we could not answer. And I said, that's what we needed. It's kind of like when we do an environmental impact report. We don't need someone to tell us to look at traffic. We know, right? So we have some things to think about. And that is when we build that into the plan, when we start to go through that mental exercise, then we have a plan that shows that people giving grant money that we've thought about it. We've had some community collaboration. We understand the pulse of the community. And we didn't just see this grant appear and decide we want to go after it. This grant that appeared fits into the plan that we already have, and therefore you need to award us the grant. And specifically, that'll be in these areas of overlap we've talked about, which is environmental justice, which is we're just learning. We're newbies at this, those of us at the county. A lot of the service providers and SAC Act and Mutual Assistance Network that are on with us today, you have a lot more experience in that. So what we're trying to do is set that platform to show that the county's thought about this. Same thing with climate adaptation and climate change. And Cole, for you, I saw your email today talking about the local hazard mitigation plan, and were we looking at all these not co-benefits, but just like the slide Cindy had where things overlap, and indeed we are. I'm the planning department person that's participating in that local hazard mitigation plan. And for the rest of the group, what that means is when we add something to the local hazard mitigation plan, such as maybe dealing with the flooding along Northrop or at the Woodside condos, that means, and we build this project to give a nod to that and maybe do some green space treatments to help deal with that flooding, then we can partner with FEMA when FEMA gives out grants to mitigate that flood risk to match funding, so to speak. And then can't stress enough, it just shows that we've gone through the public process and there is some community support for these activities, because no one likes to fund a grant and then have there be community outcry about, well, this isn't what we want. And so again, I just want to state, we heard some things in our breakout group that we might need to not redirect, but fine tune and focus our presentation so that we know that we have that broad-based community support.
I would like to give you a little history for the flooding on Northrop. Arden Arcade on Watt Avenue, from the river all the way to Northrop, are ancient sloughs. The flooding occurs because the water level is so high due to the ancient sloughs. You start digging again on Watt Avenue for any form of widening, you will have a flood like they did in the 60s, because there are ancient sloughs that you're not going to remove. They're going to be there forever unless you put concrete, God only knows how far. We've got a problem with water only because of the ancient sloughs.
Yeah, and that's, thank you for that history. I think the important thing will be, you know, in our visioning process is acknowledging that and reminding us that the best thing to do is let nature handle that. And if we can take care of it again on site, much better intervention. And in no instance in our work are we proposing any kind of widening to roads. If anything, there would be, reallocating any of the space that's in the right of way to green infrastructure opportunities. So that's a really important thing. I wanted to just make sure John Cranley received the response he wanted and didn't have a second question. So John, did you have a second part to your question? I feel like you did. Maybe I was wrong.
No second question. Just thanks for the opportunity to listen in on what's going on with this project.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining. Go ahead.
Sorry.
Yep.
We have, I think, 2 more hands raised and 1 question in the chat, so maybe we can get to 1 or 2 more questions. We only have a few minutes left. I'll read the question in the chat first. It's from, and I apologize if I say your name incorrectly, Talitha Floyd. And she wants to ask, for future steps, what is the long-term plan for the people that are in the actual community that are not able to access this planning structure? For example, those that can't or don't use Zoom or the internet, how do they get to provide input?
That's a great question. I appreciate the question. We're in sort of unprecedented times around this, and we've done, I'd say, the best we can to get out to the community. We've made a robust effort to reach different organizations as advocates and as representatives of the community. And I think we'll continue to leverage that structure and ask for people to, we've had lots of opportunities to have focus group conversations or listening sessions, frankly, and we can do that by phone as well. And I think those are some of the ways we can do that in this, in the era of this kind of pandemic situation that we're dealing with right now. But for future planning, we know that this is only one aspect of how we engage with folks, and that we will continue to reach out. One of the things we did do, heard loud and clear from the last session, was the importance of students and understanding how they are true community members as well, and the opportunity that we have to not only meet with them. So we're going to have a listening session in a couple weeks' time, and have created a nice kind of learning module for them around that. But then we want to hear from them, and the idea there is to really, hopefully that can snowball into then talking with the parents of the community as well, because a lot of the students obviously live in the area and their parents do, or their guardians do as well. So we want to be able to continue to make our engagement all that much better in this process, and then of course in processes moving forward.
So we have, it looks like one more hand raised and one more minute.
Okay.
So this is the 916-485 number. You should be able to unmute.
Okay, that's Jean, I think.
Hi, this is Gene Lozano again. I was wondering, will we have in the future a meeting or something where talking about how the traffic calming issues of motorists with issues of the danger pedestrians have making street crossings with right turns on red lights, and for instance, the Howe and Hurley Way, the south west corner, there's no control there, but to get out to the island where the traffic signals are, it's very hazardous making that crossing there. Motorists just whip around there. So I was just wondering when we might hear about some ideas of slowing down cars and making those turns so it's safer for pedestrians to cross the streets, particularly those that are wide, large intersections. Thank you.
Yeah, Gee, great question. And one of the things I've talked about with Ian and a couple others, is to have another conversation with you specifically around mobility concerns and visibility at certain intersections. You saw in some of the conversation around the transportation, we are thinking about some spot treatments. One example to deal with some of that is to do curb bump outs, right? So you can't allow for the permissive right turn at certain areas. So there's some different interventions. We'd love to have another conversation with you. So look for a future touch point with Christy or myself, and we'll hopefully we can organize that for this week.
Sure.
So we're right at 7 o'clock, and I'd love to turn this back over to Christy and John for any parting words that you may want to leave us with. And before we do that, I'm going to mention we have another session Thursday of this week. Make a plug for that. You can find out all the information on the website again, and encourage you to come on out for that meeting and bring a friend. So I'll turn it over to Christy or John.
I'm going to go find the lights real quick, but I really appreciate all of you attending this meeting, and I really appreciate all the feedback we've gotten, and I really look forward to connecting more in the future. But I will still be on, but I won't be at my desk. So.
And I'll just add to what Christy said. Thank you to every person that participated tonight. Thank you to the neighbors and the community organizations. Your input is what we need. And I said it once, I'm going to say it again. I'm really happy that there was a question asked that made me go, that made tonight worth the 2 hours of investment. So thank you, everybody.
Yes, thanks everyone, and we'll be in touch, and please stay tuned to the website and come back out for Thursday's meeting. Bye-bye.
Thanks everybody, good night.
Thank you.